Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 704. This is the pre-show, that marvelous time of the program where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. And let's see here. We have two more Monday nights with this format, and we're done with the Hangouts. Done.
Really? It's coming that quick, huh?
Yes.
Oh my goodness!
So
I told Margaret she might be the last guest that uses Hangouts, but I guess we'll make it one or two more shows.
So people have been sending me suggestions, which is marvelous, on what alternative platforms we could use.
They're elected chief technology officer.
Bill, you might check your mic. You sound like you're in a urinal somewhere.
No, I'm afraid it's my internet. It's not my mic. My mic is fine. All right, I may have.
You rarely ever sound like that. He just hung up on us. So one interesting, and I've seen a lot of these platforms, Zoom and GoToMeeting and all these other ones, but the one I've not heard of is called StreamYard. StreamYard, browser-based live studio for professionals. And it's apparently in beta, which will fit perfect with this show because this show is still in beta after 13 years.
Yeah.
We'll never come out of beta.
If it's professional, then we can't use it.
Yeah, I'm about to say that's the other problem. It says professional, so. But that looks, we need something that's easy. And Skype, I guess, would be easy. But to me, if you're using Skype, everybody's in a box like the Brady Bunch. Where with this, you've got somebody that's full screen. Whoever's talking goes full screen. Everybody else is in a small box down at the bottom, which makes sense. But if everybody's, like the Brady Bunch, everybody's in a similar box the whole show. I don't know.
Did you check out that Zoom thing?
Yeah, Zoom is popular, and again, somebody sent a new one in called StreamYard, which looks maybe like something that might work. It's browser based, so no, downloading software or something like that. But we probably will need to do a test in the next week or two.
When did making sense become a requirement for the show? Was I out that episode?
Yeah, you missed that one. That was back in 2014.
Hey James, you want to know why I've sounded so funny?
Why?
This is my microphone setup. It's a coffee cup holding my microphone since the stand is broken. And when you turn the microphone around backwards, that's what happens.
Wow.
I have never seen anything sillier than that.
Well, audio. Welcome to my world. It works really well in the Hampton Inn.
What I do is in my hotel rooms, I'll use the ice bucket, and that becomes my mic stand. I do that all the time, but I've never used coffee.
You have a bigger mic. Would you invite Margaret Orr for me, please?
Show titles are just rolling out. and invite my friend Eric too, please.
Yeah. I've got Eric's email.
Yeah, hurry and invite Margaret quickly.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hey, Aubrey. Okay. You look tired.
You made it.
I feel like death run over. James,
I thought you were going to say something else. And
I don't
James
know how you do this every night.
Because he's been doing it since 1978, as we learned last week.
The cloud of fatigue.
I couldn't eat. I haven't eaten anything all day.
You're like Elle. If she doesn't get 8 hours of sleep, she's like the people on the Snickers commercial.
I would have loved to have had 4.
All right.
I guess it's like Kim now with the baby.
I was just going to say that's familiar, but man, you are rocking it. I'm impressed that you're here.
Well, Bill said he got Margaret on, and I was like, I like her. I follow her on Twitter. I can't pass this up, so I'll hop on for the beginning until I get into show.
So, Bill, do I need to add a gmail.com to this address?
Yes. Sorry, James.
Okay. All right. So we'll try that.
We've been trying to get her on for about 12 years and finally scored tonight. We would have had Lamar White too, but the Rolling Stones moved their show from Sunday night to Monday night in the Superdome, and his response was, "It's my civic duty to go."
Oh, that's funny.
So he'll be on the next time a hurricane threatens New Orleans. All right.
So
have you invited James?
people
The technology guys like wanting to know.
Yes, I have invited Margaret. She just joined us. And,
hey, Margaret. There we go. Perfect. Yay.
I'm here. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Margaret. Did John just text me? Because I didn't.
I don't know if he texted you or not.
Says email. Oh, that's probably Troy. Yeah, because Troy's not identified in my Apple chat. Let me send him an invite. We're so glad to have you on tonight.
Thank you. And James, I just want you to know I've been a big fan for a long, long time. Hi, Aubrey.
Hi, Margaret. How are you? I was about to say the same about you.
Oh, bless you. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to have you on.
Thank you.
Well, Margaret, you're a legend. This is like you're a legend. I mean, this is like awesome.
You're stealing my thunder, James. Use that word.
You're the legend, James. You are.
Well,
my role model.
Well, I did everything I could do to get Margaret on, and then I finally said, "But James Spann is the host," and she's like, "I love James Spann." I'm like, "Then come spend 30 minutes with us tonight."
So no, you are. Do you got to do the 9:00, Margaret, or you have a 10:00?
I have a 10:00, so I go on at 10, and we've got some tapings at 9:00, so I'll boogie out of here at that time.
Yeah, I've got a 10:00 Central Time, so I'm kind of
right. We're the same thing.
I mean, right. How in the world I have escaped a 9:00 Central Time newscast? I don't know, but man, am I blessed, because it gives me the chance to go see my wife most nights except Monday because of this show, and it just gives me a chance to get some things done. Most everybody's doing a 9:00 now. You know, we have all these we have 21, 68, 47, 83. I don't even know what my numbers are here now, but they could easily do a 9:00 news on one of them, but they haven't. So
don't give them any ideas. Hopefully they're not listening.
Please don't do. But wait, James, I read that you only get 3 hours sleep. Is that true?
If I'm lucky. See, the truth is, Margaret, I am only 27 years old. This is what you look like when you never, ever sleep.
I need more sleep than that.
Amen, sister.
Aubrey is struggling with the lack of sleep thing, so she's struggling.
Hey, James, did you send a note to Eric?
I did. I sent it the traditional way, but let me send it to him the email way, because I can do that as well. You can be invited directly, which is how I did it, or you can email this link, which seems to be the better way for some people. So,
but the organic way was the better way for Margaret. We couldn't make the email link work today.
No, but John Britton, our IT guy, managed to get that going.
We love John.
Yeah, I love John Britton. Wait, do you know what I do? I have a tin of chocolate, which is now empty, but I keep it right by my desk so that when I need something, I always get it done. And John is the biggest consumer of the chocolate, and I get good chocolate. It's not the cheap stuff.
There you go.
All right. So let me, I have sent email links to John Scala, Troy.
I did too.
Kevin's guest.
Here comes Dr. John. Dr. John had a pick. There's Troy. Yay.
And I hear the helium.
Gonna have a full house.
John, talk to us.
He doesn't even stick around now to take the abuse. He just leaves. You didn't even get to play the song for him, James.
No Fender.
Do you know who we have here tonight? The Rolling Stones.
I know.
Wow.
I know, and I couldn't go. I was going at Jazz Fest, and then they canceled because Mick had, of course, heart problems. And then I was invited to go tonight, and I couldn't go.
And you chose us over the Rolling Stones, Margaret. How nice. We're just going to edit that little part out about you couldn't go.
Well, I couldn't go because I'm working, and everybody else is exhausted. This is my schedule, so.
Troy.
Good evening.
All right. So I've got we're down to Kevin, your guest. I have emailed him.
And here he comes.
He's trying to go. There he goes.
He's entering now.
Yep. He's there.
Yay.
Oh, you just tweeted me, James.
I did, because when you're on this show, the audience will skyrocket.
You're kind of a big deal, Margaret.
Kind of a big deal.
Very regular.
You have many leather-bound books, and your home smells of rich mahogany.
Okay, WeatherBrains, we got it.
So I think we're all here. Let's see.
Yeah, we just had Nate. We'd have a full house.
Right? This is great.
We have to wait until 30 after the hour because Margaret, just so we always like to disclose this. This show is on cable television in my market. It's on the dot twos, and the cable cable head ends pick it up. So people do watch on regular television here, but most people listen.
Right.
Some people watch it live, but this is a core audio show. So, and you're one of the last guests on Google Hangouts. This platform goes away in 2 weeks. So,
Oh no, we're going to have to figure that out.
We are. Somebody just sent me a note on Instagram saying we should use Discord, and I think that's all the gamers use that. It's they have a video feature for group chats. Everyone would just have to create an account. We just need to find something where whoever's speaking can be made full screen like this, and all of the guests are in the smaller boxes, because most of what I've seen, everybody is an equal sized box like the Brady Bunch. And, it's just that, and not that many of us even know what that show is, but search Brady Bunch.
Oh, yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. I want to say hi to Troy because I'm friends with Tony Plahetsky.
Absolutely.
And he knows you well, and y'all have hung out together. Tony is one of my good friends who's in Austin and works for the paper and the television station. He's an investigative reporter.
Yeah, and Margaret, good to see you as well. You're looking beautiful as always, and Tony, really nice guy, works for the Austin American-Statesman and investigative reporter, as Margaret said, and really good guy.
Thank you. I think so too.
And let's welcome our television audience. 30 minutes after the hour. Thank you. This is WeatherBrains. We are locked and loaded. John's clock is going off, so we know it's time to start the show.
It's time.
I learned something about cuckoos. You'll have to ask me later about that, John, last night.
Well, wait, tell us now.
Let's let the show start. See,
okay.
we don't want to. The problem is so much of the good material is done before the show starts. So let's hold that for the show. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains, the weekly show all about weather, episode number 704, and this is for the 15th of July, 2019. We're approaching the old dog days of summer. Hurricane season is here. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Got a full house on the show this week, including the lovely Aubrey Herbanowitz, who slept all of 1.2 hours last night. What happened?
You know me and my crazy Sunday nights.
Oh, Lord.
Well,
that is a show title, by
the way. Man. My sass always gets me in trouble, doesn't it?
So other than the lack of sleep, Aubrey, how are you?
I think I'm okay. I'm not really sure how I'm functioning right now, but I think I'm all right. And not to mention the storms were a little bit more active than I think I was expecting this afternoon. So I was doing my thing and forecasting, and I was just like, oh crap.
Oh,
Oh man.
And that's a show title.
And then she heard Margaret Orr was going to be on, and she came out of her funk.
I did. I told Bill, I was like, all right, I'll be there for the first part.
Yeah, we don't know how long we'll keep Aubrey, but we're delighted that you're here. And we heard the voice of the man with the hair like an angel, Dr. John Scala, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. John, how are you?
We're on the other side of the warm front, so it's really nice here. It's 73 degrees. We have a dew point of 63. I'll take it.
Oh, wow.
But that won't be the case the rest of the week, Aubrey. You're going to bring that air to us.
I'm going to hand deliver it to you, John. I'm headed up to the Finger Lakes Wednesday. I will bring that bad boy right up there.
I'll be there in 3 weeks, so we cannot wait.
So Troy Kimmel is back on the show this week. Troy, you've been off for a few weeks. Where have you been? What's going on here?
Kind of globe trotting a little bit, making a run out in the Pacific. I have some friends out in Guam, and just went out there and over to actually to Japan for a little bit.
Wow.
And getting back and glad to be back here. We'll see if Kevin can outdo this. Right now in Austin, it's 473 degrees. I don't know. Margaret may be able to outbe that with the heat stress in New Orleans.
Oh, wait. It's 84 degrees right now. The dew point is 77. So I think I've got our dew point has been over 80 the past few days. Yeah, we got dew point.
Wow. Yeah, some of us go to Gatlinburg, and Troy goes to Guam and Japan. What the heck?
So we'll have some questions about that trip in a minute, but I see, look who's back, Dr. Kim Cloco McLean. She has been absent with vacations and children and illnesses and everything else, but we're glad you're back, Kim.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to be back. I'm so glad to be well. I tell you, it seems that the flu hit my whole family, and I tell you, having that in July is just not great. It's not good ever, but it's really not good in July. So, but I did get to go this weekend to a wedding in Colorado. So I wasn't quite Guam, but man, it was nice it was after all of that, I was like, all right, I'm going to a hot springs wedding. This is going to be great. And it was. Glad to be back with you all.
Awesome. So Kevin Selly, our chief crank, is on the show this week.
Hey.
What's cranky about this week?
Nothing except the heat and the humidity. Yeah, we're 90 over 69 right now. Our dew point, I guess it's somewhat common for Margaret to get to 80, but we hit 80 a week or two ago, and that was the first time since I think the mid 90s, 1996.
Wow.
Yeah, that we had a dew point of 80 up here, so that's fairly unpleasant. But the ridge is taking hold, so we're just going to sit back and enjoy summertime. Barry tossed us, I think, 4, maybe 5 of the teeniest little showers that you ever saw over the weekend. And so that was about it. And before we move on, I want to introduce our guest WeatherBrain. My good friend Eric Janson is at WLOX in Biloxi, Mississippi. And last week, James' pick of the week had to do with the algae bloom. And obviously, when I think of algae and slimy things, I think of my friend Eric Janson.
Eric, our friend's great.
He's right there on the coast, and he's paying attention to this thing. And so I thought, boy, it'd be great to have him come on. He's been in contact with some of the scientists there. And then obviously he had to deal with Barry over the weekend. So, Eric, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for inviting me. And I had to work with the accelerant for 2 years. So
I didn't mention that part. He did weekends here my first 2 years, and I miss him dearly every day. He's one of the best severe weather guys around, and I keep begging him to come back, but he's worked here once, and that was more than enough.
Eric, everybody loves you, man. Everybody in that market, they think you're fantastic. Kevin thinks you're fantastic. So
yeah, can I tell the picture story up there, or should I not? About you Twitter and stuff. Well, about you. I mean, Eric is an excellent photographer. Tell him your Twitter handle.
Weatherick.
Yeah, Weatherick. I see, like Eric, but. He got in some trouble with some people in James's orbit for.
Oh, you want me to tell the story?
Should I tell it or should I not?
Boy.
Should we tell it?
Oh,
I guess,
yes.
since you didn't say no, I guess we can. Well, everybody knows, people tag James on photos, right? And,
Right. You're the one who got me to start tweeting at Span.
that's a good point. Yeah, because you want James to see them and you want the retweets and things like that. But there are certain people in James's market at a station that may not be named, Channel 6, that get grumpy when he tags James because it's a competing station and a competing company. And I don't know, some crazy woman at that station, she's a producer or something like that, gives him a bad time when he tags James, which I think is kind of silly.
Wow.
I can't believe you're encouraging the use of Twitter, Kevin. That's kind of
surprising.
surprising.
I didn't say use it. I mean, it's going on. I just had to comment on it as the accelerant.
See, Kevin is just pointing out how Twitter is trouble. So that's what he's pointing out. But Bill Murray, bring in our guest because we're all excited to have her on the show too, our main guest for tonight.
Yeah, I told her earlier that we've only been trying for 100 years to get her on the show, but tonight's guest WeatherBrain is a New Orleans legend, one of the best guest gets in the WeatherBrains podcast history. She's the chief meteorologist at WDSU in the Crescent City. Margaret Orr, welcome to the show.
It is so great to be here. And I want you to know I went on vacation too. And it happened to be when we had all of our flooding in New Orleans. I planned it 6 months in advance. I figured the first week of June, I may be okay. And then we had that weather. But I went to Siesta Key. And the most exciting thing I got to see was a loggerhead turtle laying its eggs. And I came upon it early in the morning. It was still there. They're supposed to be off the beach. And I got nervous. I called Florida Fish and Wildlife, and they said, hey, if you had 100 babies, you'd be tired too. And I went, and they asked me to stay and watch it. And I did, called all of my friends and they came and watched. And it was just an amazing sight. So that was my vacation, not Japan or Guam or whatever.
Well, just as exciting. There's no question about it. So, yeah, John, my cuckoo story was that Elle and I were watching a show on birds and eggs last night. And the cuckoo has to sneak its egg into other birds' nests so that they can maintain it.
Right,
so they actually have to colorize them so that they look like the other bird's eggs, and so that it'll fool the other bird into raising their young, which is kind of cool or diabolical or something. I'm not sure what it is, but anyway, time your cuckoo comes off now, I'll think of that.
Well, unfortunately tonight my cuckoo is in for service.
Oh my goodness!
That is a show title. That's a show title.
That is the show title.
That's the next 17 show titles.
That's perfect.
Now we just need the subheader.
Everyone will know exactly what that one means immediately.
Oh, yes.
But Margaret, I know you've had a little storm come through the last few days, but we want to go back to 1965. You were in Betsy as a child. Talk and you've been in New Orleans all this time. So you've been through so many amazing storms and scares and things. So let's start at the beginning with Betsy.
Well, people wonder, why did I get into this business? My grandfather was a rancher in Texas, and he was always praying for rain and then praying it would stop. You know how that goes. But we went through Betsy, and my father was a sailor. We went out to the lakefront, kind of got the boat all in place, and then went and he went up on the rooftop and kind of nailed everything down. And I really didn't know what was going to happen. I had not a clue. I was a kid. We didn't have the Weather Channel then. And as time progressed, our house was shaking. And my father, who was a civil engineer, opened up all the doors, opened up all of the windows, which of course you're not supposed to do because you can lose the roof of your house. And we did lose part of our roof. But it was terrifying. I mean, the rain, the wind, everything. Winds were, over 130 miles per hour. And if you look at the track from the Hurricane Center, it actually had the hurricane not moving over New Orleans. And I want you to know it did. All of a sudden, the wind stopped. And I asked my father, what's happening? Is it gone? Are we done? And he went, no, we're in the eye. And I went, what's the eye? And he went, come on. And he grabbed my hand. We went outside. And I looked up and I could see the stars.
Wow.
And it was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. And the air was like a warm blanket. And it's truly something you never forget. And then he grabbed my hand and said, you got to go inside now. And I went, wait, no, I want to stay out. He said, no, you got to go in. And then all hell broke loose after that. So that was my first introduction. And then along came Camille. Of course, in New Orleans, Camille was not as bad, but it was along the coast, and it was devastating for the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And by the way, August 17th is the 50th anniversary.
And guess who we have that night, Margaret? Going to be on the show. Neil Frank.
Oh my gosh, he's so amazing. I love Neil Frank.
He's the other you that we've been trying to
he's
get
much more.
all these years.
He's much more. I mean, and to hear him talk about Ike, you need to have him come on to talk about Ike. He's really incredible. And of course, what happened with Ike, just to briefly move there, is that it was just a cat too. And so people didn't pay attention. And I was watching all of these press conferences, and I'm for Galveston, for example, and I'm going, these people need to get the hell out of Dodge. By the way, I thought that for Sandy too, as they were moving their chairs. And I'm going, don't quibble about what it is or what it isn't. Get them out of there. And so with Ike, people waited too long. And then they couldn't get out because that surge rose too quickly. And really from Katrina and from Ike, we learned the significance of size. I mean, we knew size mattered, but when it came to Katrina and when it came to Ike, that size created that storm surge. I mean, you look back at Charlie, which was a much smaller storm, but a much stronger storm, and it didn't create that kind of storm surge that we saw with Katrina and with Ike. But when we look at Camille, my sister had friends there who lost their lives. And, you know, it's still, all of these hurricanes, you know, were just so devastating. And I interviewed a man who was a teenager at the time, and he was just up a little bit on a bluff for Camille. He was right there on the beach, and his whole family was holding the door to try to prevent it from being blown in and the water coming in. And when they opened, they had to go around, I think. And when outside the next day, the debris was just stacked high in front of his house, and somehow they survived. But Camille was the measure for all devastating hurricanes. I mean, a storm surge of 25 feet. Who ever thought that we would beat that? And when we look at Katrina, we really think that Camille killed people in Katrina because they had survived.
There's no question.
Yeah.
Brian Peters and I were on the Mississippi Gulf Coast on that Sunday night, and we were evacuating back to Mobile, and we stopped at a Burger King, and it was full of people.
Yeah.
And Brian started asking them, you know, why are you not leaving? And they said, we made it through Camille. We heard it over and over and over again. And some of those people may not have made it that next morning.
I know it. And that was the problem with Katrina and Isaac. You know, Katrina came in at the mouth of the Mississippi River, then went northeast towards the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Isaac, you know, went to the mouth of the river, took 7 hours to get to Port Fourchon. It was moving so slowly, but it came in west of the river. And because it came in west of the river, you had more of an onshore push, so that in Laplace, which didn't flood during Katrina, they were totally flooded, completely, totally flooded. And when we looked at Barry, you know, there was this forecast of all this heavy rain, and there was the forecast for storm surge. And there was concern that Laplace could have issues, but the lake only went up about 3.5 feet. Now, I know, Eric, you're going to be talking about algae. The good thing about that east wind that we had into the lake is that we had salt water moving into the lake because, you know, the spillway has been, wait, I have to look and see. Hold on. It's now been open 67 days for the second time.
Since May 10th or May 11th is when they opened it the second time.
67 days for that second time. Now it's at 16.21 feet for the Mississippi River, and it is forecast to get down to 15.5 feet on July 27th, when we should then have that slow closing of the Mississippi River. But because of that east wind, we had salt water move into the lake, and that should help with the fresh water. But Eric, I'll leave that to you to talk about that. But believe me, we've been talking algae over here because it's all in the lake. Here. It's killing our seafood. I was talking with someone who was a fisherman when he was in college at LSU. And that was back in 1973 when they opened the spillway. And he said the first day after they opened the spillway, they were still catching shrimp and fish and all of that. By about the third day, they were noticing that the shrimp were dying and the fish that they had brought up were dying before they had a chance to even throw it back. And then by a week later, almost everything was dead. And so we're seeing that now. Yeah, it's bad.
We're seeing it too in the Mississippi Sound. The fishermen and the shrimpers, they're not catching big shrimp. They're all really small, and the
they're
oysters.
dying.
A lot of the oysters are dying. There was a project earlier this winter where they kind of planted these oyster beds, and all of those, about 90% of those were dead because of the low salinity. Everything's just it's basically like we have a lake right here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast because of the freshwater intrusion from the Sound. Now, the thing about the way our geography is, though, is we benefit more from a northerly wind because the freshwater, it's so much, it's less dense, so it kind of sits on top of the water. When you get that north wind, it pushes it out beyond the barrier island. So it just kind of depends on your geography. So the east wind kind of helped push it back towards Lake Pontchartrain. And we did see our salinity levels did go up a little bit during that time period for Barry. But I was looking at them just now, and they're kind of going back down, and they're still a little bit below what they should be for this time of the year.
But hopefully it was mixed up a little bit, get some more oxygen in there, and hopefully that will help.
Right. Now, Eric and Margaret, I've always, known about algal blooms and the red tide, and it's annoying when you're at the beach, but this is an emergency. I had no idea that it was affecting our seafood.
And it's not, that's the thing too. It's not really a red tide. It's the what causes a red tide is more of a saltwater liking algae, but the algae that we're seeing in the Mississippi River or in the Sound is actually more of a freshwater type of algae, the blue-green algae. It likes the freshwater, and so it really shouldn't be in the Mississippi Sound. It's just that our salinity levels are so low because of the opening of the Bonnie Carey Spillway. And there's also a lot of controversy. I guess it's controversy, but a lot of people here in Mississippi feel like, well, they should have opened the Morganza Spillway instead of the Bonnie Carey Spillway. But also opening the Morganza Spillway has a lot of consequences as well. So I don't know. It goes into the Atchafalaya River Basin.
The storm surge was higher there, so that if you had the water coming down the Atchafalaya when you had landfall right there at Marsh Island, you were going to have more surge moving in. And you also are required to give at least 3 days notice so that people can remove their cattle and get everything up and away, and that the wildlife has a chance to survive. But the Morganza is more of an impact for Baton Rouge, which has been extremely high. And the spillway, more of an impact for New Orleans. And let's face it, the river has been really high. The second time it opened, it got up to 17.25 feet. They don't like it over 17 feet. They don't like 1.25 million cubic feet per second, and it was. And, the levees have had water against them for over 150 days at 15 feet. So we need to protect our levees. And if you look at the number of people impacted, should a ship go awry, that's a catastrophe greater than Katrina.
Now, Dr. John, I've learned more tonight than I've ever learned on this show in 25 minutes. There's no question about it. No, seriously, this is amazing stuff. So take us back to 69. Talk about Nash Roberts for a minute.
Nash Roberts. Do you know, for Camille, and I watched Nash Roberts as a young child. Okay. He was the king. He was at our station. I think he was at 8. He was at 4. Then he retired and he would come back to 4 and give the forecast. He used the marker and the pointer, but then while he said that, I went, you know what? I used a marker and I used a pointer. So I know all about that time period. But Nash went door to door, knocking on doors along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, telling people to leave. That's the kind of man
That's
he
a true
was.
Story.
That is a true story.
That
Went
sounds like
door
Isaac
to
Klein
door.
in Galveston. That's
Well,
crazy.
right. But who, by the way, came back and worked in New Orleans later. But Nash was a dedicated man and saved, I don't know how many lives, because if he hadn't gone door to door, who knows what would have happened. Look at that. I mean, so many beautiful homes were just nothing was left. Nothing was left. That one's just fine.
Margaret, let me interrupt you for a second. A lot of people don't realize what the storm surge was off of Lake Pontchartrain. This is a picture that I took about 6 weeks after Katrina, but this is on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain.
Yeah.
It's not New Orleans. There's nothing left of this home, and that's way up from the coastline.
Let me tell you. So I was here for Katrina. I didn't leave. In fact, I went up to our news director at the time after I had gotten off the air at about 2 p.m. on Sunday and said, okay, what's the plan? And he said, we're going to go to our antenna in Chalmette. And I went, you realize it may be under 25 feet of water, right? He didn't say a word and he walked away. Somebody had offered me a room at the Hilton and I called her up and said, hey, is that room still available? And so a group of us went to the Hilton and stayed there. And I went to bed because I was exhausted. I had been, working the overnight shift until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I woke up and I felt this moving. And I heard this creaking and it sounded like my grandmother's rocking chair. And I went, oh my gosh, this was only like 9 o'clock. I'm getting up and getting dressed and going downstairs because I want to make sure if this hotel goes down, I'm dressed, as if they could even find me. And then started doing phoners. The Hilton was great. They took in everybody. They took in their pets. They took in employees, families. And I was up at about, I don't know what time it was, 12:30 or so, doing a phoner with the station. And I went, oh my gosh, the glass window. I don't know if y'all have been to the Hilton, I'm sure, for the hurricane conferences and all of that. That bank of glass windows by the escalator shattered as the families of employees were coming down the escalator walking. There was no electricity. And they came down because the room where they were staying was flooding. And the station interrupted me and said, Margaret, we got to go. The Superdome roof is coming off. And I went, okay, I know what's more important.
Wow.
I mean, Katrina was, I remember Betsy, and Betsy seemed stronger to me. In Katrina, my ears were popping.
Mhm.
And I went, this is not good. And that was before it made landfall. We, of course, lost all power. And somebody had a radio, battery operated. And there was a group of people around this one battery operated radio, dogs, the whole thing. And we're sitting there listening. And we're hearing, all of these disaster reports. And then I never heard anything from Lakeview. And I went, oh my gosh, what has happened? What has happened here? And, of course, it had flooded. And I heard reports from some people saying there was no water. And then all of a sudden, it started rising. And so we could not leave the Hilton right away. They wouldn't let us. But finally they did. And a guy who was the son of the owner of Milius's Bar had a great big truck. And we all piled into the truck and we took off to see what we could find. And we just saw the water coming in. And I went, oh my God, the city is going to flood. There is no way you can stop this until it equalizes or until they stop it up. And so that was Monday. I stayed until Tuesday and then drove, I think, through Homa to get to Baton Rouge where my family was. We met briefly and said goodbye. Oh, no. There was one other stop. A friend of ours had a boat. We drove to Mandeville, took the boat across the lake.
Wow.
Yeah. And my house was right by the lake. There were helicopters taking our pictures. And we went to my house. We were able to walk to it. My neighborhood was flooded. My house was not. My street was not. We got my daughter's uniforms, her books, and the silver, which I hadn't taken, and took it across the lake and then over to Baton Rouge and stayed in St. Francisville for a couple of days. And then I went to work in Baton Rouge, or rather in Jackson, where we have a sister station, and Wesh in Orlando. But it was a surreal experience, not being able to go home for 2 months, knowing the city was flooded. And when I finally drove back over a rickety Slidell twin span bridge, there were still, this is 2 months later, boats all on the side of the road. There was no electricity. There were no lights. It was just devastation, just complete and total devastation. And it remained flooded for well over a month and a half. Thousands of homes destroyed, thousands of cars destroyed, thousands of people died. I mean, it was the worst. And I hope we never get anything else as bad as Katrina. But, that really teaches you something like Katrina, like Ike, like Isaac, make you very wary. And then you look at Nate and Gordon, which we've had over the past couple of years. Eric, more of an issue for you on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but big blow up of potential, which did not happen. And it was dry air and wind shear. Yeah. So that when we looked at Barry, I went, we've got dry air and wind shear, which I kept saying, but I also have to give the official forecast. And finally, I backed off and said, some of us may only get 1 to 2 inches of rain, and some of us got far less. And so that's kind of one of the things I'd like to talk with you all about. How do you deal with the official forecast, which I totally, completely believe you have to give, and your gut feeling that what you're seeing isn't right?
I got a Margaret Troy here.
Hey, Troy.
Quick. And this is one that I've kind of watched your coverage. We watched coverage long distance via the streaming thing. I don't know. They say that's going on. I don't understand all that computer stuff. But one thing that I noticed was, and of course, the lighter rain in the New Orleans metro didn't cause the problems that we'd seen before. But my question for you, Margaret, following Katrina, have we made changes in the levee boards, in the pumps? Are we in better shape in the bowl now than we were in 2005, Margaret?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We are definitely better off. But, there's a hurricane out there that can top it. You look at what happened with the Mississippi River, and thank God Barry was not bad. Yeah. Because that Mississippi River has never been that high. Now, Lee was an interesting storm. I don't know if you remember Lee, Texas, absolutely dry. They were praying for that rain.
Was it in 2011?
I know. Yeah. Well, I'd have to go back and look and say 2011. 2011, yes. And Lee, totally, completely dry air, tore it apart. And, but we had a high river. So that was interesting.
Lee also led to big wildfires in Possum Kingdom, Texas.
Yeah. Yes.
Lee was a huge problem for us in Pennsylvania. For many locations, it actually exceeded what Agnes did in 1972. Wow. So we had a flood of record in many locations in central Pennsylvania from Lee. And
Texas was begging for that rain.
Well, Margaret, let me ask you this in reference to the river real quick. When you're sitting there just north of the Hilton Riverside there, and you're on the levee and you're looking at the river, how far from the top of that levee is the Mississippi River tonight?
I haven't gone out there tonight. So I've been working for the past whatever days, but it's not that far. The problem, the city is protected 20 feet. There's some areas that it's 25 feet, because just imagine as the river flows, it hits a bend in the river. And so it's got to be higher because it's going to go up higher. But had it been up to 19 feet or 20 feet, which was forecast, there would not be much left. So that was the concern. And then with the wind that Barry was forecast, and the waves, and the rain. Now, granted, it's rain upstream that causes more of an issue, but the river is what scared me more than anything.
Hey, can I bring in Eric for a second, because I want to kind of tie this in with Katrina as well. Everything that we saw, and I can only begin. I know it was much worse than what we saw. I can only imagine with what Margaret is telling us. But I think one of the big stories about Katrina, being someone, by the way, Margaret, that in Camille, I lived in North Mississippi at the time, native Texan, but I was living up in North Mississippi back in the late 60s. But in Katrina, Eric, South Mississippi and coastal Mississippi, people never, ever saw what incredible damage. I think New Orleans took the attention away. The damage on the Mississippi coast, as I understand it, Eric, was just amazing. I mean, and we never really saw it because we saw the flooding of the bowl of New Orleans, right?
Right. That's for reference. I wrote out Katrina in Hammond, Louisiana, which is just to the north. It's north of Lake Pontchartrain. I'm from Louisiana. 2005 was a very interesting year for me. It was my first year at LSU, my first week of school, and then all of a sudden the whole next week was canceled. They made the basketball, I think it's called the PMAC, on LSU's campus. They made it sort of like a temporary, not morgue, but it was sort of like a temporary Red Cross center. Yeah. That was sort of a rumor going around. But I went through Katrina in that sense over there, but I did not go through it while I was here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. But yeah, when I got here in 2017, and that was a interesting year because up until maybe 2005, 2008, maybe that was the last sort of active year of big hurricanes in the Gulf. 2017, you had Harvey and Irma, and that sort of started a frenzy. And so it was my first year here, and everyone just it was my first time being on the coast and sort of dealing with the anxiety that everyone had from hurricane season, and everybody on social media and everything, just when Irma was a Cat 5 in the Atlantic, everyone was like, oh, it's coming here.
Yeah.
Katrina wasn't supposed to come here, and it came here. And that was sort of the perception that everyone had. And I think because of the fact that the Mississippi Gulf Coast really did get the brunt of the storm surge. If you came down to the coast, if you come to the coast today, you will still see the scars of Katrina.
Yeah.
When I came here and interviewed, everyone told me our TV station is actually a block from the beach.
Yep.
The debris line for Katrina stopped at the railroad tracks, which is right next to the TV station.
Yep.
And WLOX stayed on air during Katrina while the newsroom roof blew off while they were doing coverage. But they stayed on during that whole hurricane. They stayed on for like almost 2 weeks nonstop. And I think that's probably one of WLOX's proudest moments. I wasn't there when that happened, but the devastation here was just awful. And no, people, from the stories that I hear, there are people that I work with that lost everything. They lost everything. And places that didn't flood in Camille, and I think what you said is exactly right, that Camille killed people in 2005 with Katrina, because people in Back Bay. So if you look at the geography of Harrison County of South Mississippi, there's sort of like a peninsula that Biloxi and Gulfport kind of sits on. The water kind of goes back in this bay, and Katrina just brought this huge surge of water back there, that areas that didn't flood in Camille flooded, and people, and I mean, you go back and listen to those 911 calls of people calling, and they're telling people, well, if you can't come and get me, we're just letting you know we're going to die in our attics. And that's a big deal. And yeah, to this day, I mean, the scars are still there, and people do, even when we were talking about Barry, it always comes up. New Orleans always gets the spotlight. Why are y'all always talking about New Orleans? And yeah, there is a feeling on the coast that New Orleans took the spotlight. Not that it's a great spotlight to be in. I don't know if spotlight is the right word, but people do feel that way, that New Orleans kind of took it over, and here in Mississippi, they just kind of were left for themselves, I guess. That's how they feel. That's a perception. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think just now, I think people here on the coast, there's sort of this rebirth feeling, this renaissance, if you will. Finally, the coast is beginning to get its act back together, because after Katrina, there was the BP oil spill, which kind of set things back. Then the recession happened, and then the casino industry kind of wasn't doing as well, and during the recession. And now finally we've been hurricane free, so to speak, because I mean, we had Nate and Gordon last year, really big deals, which could lead to some complacency later. Now there's kind of this feeling, okay, maybe we can get back to what we were before. But yeah, it's the storm surge, the barges, the casino barges that were literally lifted off over Highway 90 and planted on people's homes. I don't think anybody would have ever thought that was even possible, and people were just in shock.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is interesting for both Margaret and Eric is WLOX has a heck of a history, even back to Camille.
Right.
Because if I'm not mistaken, LOX, Margaret and Eric, they were located at the Buena Vista at the hotel on the Mississippi coast. Your studio was on the coast.
Yes.
And when Camille came ashore, so it has a heck of a history of community service during Camille as well as during Katrina. It's a pretty amazing story.
And the other big hurricanes everyone remembers, Frederick in '79.
I remember.
That made landfall in Jackson County. Mobile County, and then there was Elena in 1985 that everyone remembers.
Oh, Elena could not make up her mind. That girl back and forth. I was supposed to be off. I had to go back to work. You know, it's like, Elena, make up your mind.
Our assistant news director, she was like, I was going on vacation. It was Labor Day, and then all of a sudden, Elena came.
Right.
I will never forget coming home from church on Sunday and hearing John Hope say the hurricane is coming back west, and it was like hop in the car. We're going to the Gulf Coast because that thing had been targeting Mobile, and then it turned to Tampa, and we thought it was all a foregone conclusion that it would die over Florida. But then here it comes back for Labor Day.
You guys, I've got to leave you. I have loved visiting with you. Thank you so much for asking me. It's great to see you, and I think the world of all of y'all. Y'all are all so smart and talented, and you are great role models for everybody out there and doing a great job keeping people safe.
Thank you so much, Margaret. We feel the same way.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
You're
for
the greatest.
having me.
Thank you.
Mwah. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
So you notice how Margaret prepares for her 10 o'clock newscast. I walk in there,
she knew we were getting to the questions about the media hype surrounding the hurricanes. She knew when to get out.
Good timing.
Hey, Kim, you were going to ask a question. What was your question going to be? That was interesting to me. What were you going to ask?
It was related. She brought up how she had that, sort of inclination about the forecast and that the official forecast was overdoing things. I was going to ask her if there had been communication between the media partners and the forecast office and any of the national centers. What were they hearing about how the Weather Service was coming to their forecast? Because it was from their side too a very challenging set of decisions, and that threshold she was talking about, the 20-foot threshold, was a really important one, and so they didn't want to miss it. They didn't want to underdo it and end up with a surprise. And so I was very interested to hear if she had spoken with them and what she knew. And this might actually be a good question for our guest WeatherBrain, if he's aware of some of those intricacies of the forecast generation. What do you know about how that came to be, and were you in communication with the Weather Service?
So Slidell does a really good job. They do the integrated warning team meetings, especially when we have big events. I know we had a conference call. I forget. Honestly, all of last week was just a big blur. Hurricane. Honestly, we were talking about Barry since July 4th. And you have to, because if it's on social media and you're not talking about it, then you're not doing your job. Like, that's just the perception out there. And so leading into Barry, we did talk with the Weather Service. I want to say it was last Wednesday. I think that was the 11th, 10th or 11th. They were mentioning, they were worried about the concern of the rivers and for New Orleans. But I'll be honest, my concern was the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And we were focusing on the storm surge potential and the heavy rainfall potential. And that's we knew that New Orleans and west of us was probably going to be dealing with a bigger headache. And we just kind of let them have their own headache. And we kind of just focused on what we were trying to get to our viewers as far as what the main threats were going to be.
So, James, she asked an interesting question. She said, what do you do when the official forecast disagrees with what you know in your heart is going to happen?
Yeah, and then that's what I was going to ask Kim. This is a Kim question. And Kim didn't get a chance to answer, but maybe Margaret will go back and listen to this later. So that's a great question. You disagree, and let's say you don't have a collaborative chat. You don't have a way of providing input. You're left out. You're just using the Weather Service and the NHC products, and after a lot of analytical thinking and analysis, you believe that the rain from WPC, the rain forecast, or the storm surge, whatever, it's overdoing it. How do you handle that, Kim? What advice would you give a broadcaster?
Yeah, this is where I'll put on my lab hat and talk a little bit about the Facets program. I know I've talked about this before, but I think the answer really is better communication of forecast uncertainty, or really like telling the variety of stories that are possible. And that was, to my understanding, what was really at heart in this event is, there was this high-end potential, but it might have helped people if we'd put a probability on it. If we told them how likely is that event to occur, my understanding is it was a really sensitive forecast. And in that case, I think we do better to get ourselves out of our deterministic box where we have to say just one thing, and maybe talk about the variety of different storylines. And I'm not living in the area. I'm not sure the broadcasters might have been doing that, and I hope that they were. It's yeah. Tell me what your perspective was on
we
that.
can ask Eric knows everything. Eric's dying to jump in here.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So for us, the concern for Mississippi was one, storm surge. I mean, you just get a strong south wind, we flood, especially in Hancock County of our 3 coastal counties. But our rivers are very quick response rivers. You get a lot of heavy rain to our north, and they're going to flood like that. Here's the thing: the GFS model was really honing in on 6 to 15 inches of rain over our viewing area, where the European model kept on insisting the heaviest rain was going to be to our west. And so in getting on air and conveying that, we showed the WPC rainfall forecast. And I also said, and a lot of it did show that bullseye of 15 to 20 in southeast Louisiana. But, that's just whenever you ask for more. I mean, I know there's a lot of research that says, oh, you only have 2 minutes to really get your stuff out. But, we asked for more time to convey all the uncertainty in the forecast. We were showing WPC, but we also said, here's why you can't really let your guard down, because if one of those rain bands set up over us, we could easily see one of those totals. It's not that it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. And that's why for all our people who live along the rivers, you need to be taking your precautions, do what you normally do. It's not a bad idea to check your hurricane supplies, even though it may not be making landfall here. And of course, it's always we also did something. We took I took the forecast cone, and I overlaid the GFS model runs and the European. So you got the cone, but you also showed how far out the rain would fall from the cone. And so to kind of give people that visual, stop focusing just on the cone. It's going to make landfall in Louisiana. But if those rain bands extend as far out as it looks like, then we could get those rain. And it really is about conveying all the possible scenarios. And I know there's a lot of tendency in forecasters that just want to go out there and give what they think, and that's great too. But in cases like this, you have to prepare the public for what could potentially happen. And thankfully, we really didn't. I mean, our rainfall totals were not as impressive, and there were a few people that were kind of like, y'all said this, y'all said that. But honestly, compared to Gordon of last year, people were not really that. We got much more hate mail from Gordon than we did for Bear. As far as I feel like our whole weather team did a really good job at just kind of conveying the uncertainty that this is anytime you have an unorganized tropical system, the models are going to struggle. And it's a lot about educating the viewers. And I've had this feedback a lot of, oh wow, I learned something in your weathercast. Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. And a lot of that is just saying, well, this is how that works. Until we get a well-organized system, the models aren't really going to handle that well. So that's why you just got to keep up with the forecast. It's gonna change. That's what they do.
I've got kind of a follow-up for you. And this may be more of a Kim sort of question that she might ask, but okay, 2019, Eric, are the people in Hancock and Harrison and Jackson County, Mississippi, is that area prepared, or do we have too many years between us and Katrina now? Is that beginning to wear off maybe a little bit? I think Kim kind of understands where I'm coming from. Does that, you look back at, do people recognize that? Eric, where does that area that you serve, the WLOX, you feel like if the big one comes, the people will know what to do?
Well, here's the thing. I feel like people in general, Katrina is still fresh on a lot of people's mind. I mean, 14 years ago is a long time, but it's also still within the lifetime of what people remember. And Katrina was such a devastating storm, and every day people are reminded on the coast of what Katrina did. I mean, Katrina really changed the way of everyone's lives on the coast. And so I think, this is just my perception of the viewing area, but I feel like we're still kind of in that window where the adults who went through Katrina remember Katrina, and the children who went through Katrina and saw what their parents went through, they still see that as well. They still remember what a real devastating storm can do. And so you do get people that message us and say, why are you overdoing this? Katrina was the main thing. It's not no Katrina. But then that's that mentality that got people killed in Katrina because they did that for Camille. I feel like in general, this area, they know what hurricanes are and they know what they need to do. I want to say the New Orleans at their last integrated warning team meeting back in March, and they did this, and Margaret Orr was there. She was on one of the panels. They did a mock storm where they took Hurricane Michael's path and shifted it west. And we went through a scenario of, okay, there's a 50% chance of a storm developing here. How are you reacting to that? I took that idea and brought it to, I did a talk for an apartment association here on the coast. And I took that scenario and began showing these forecasts like, hey, how would you react to, it's the weekend and there's a storm potentially developing in the Caribbean? How do you go about your weekend? Oh, and most of them were like, oh, well, it's a chance for development. I'm not really worried about it. Then by the time that I took it to where what Michael actually did and shifted it west into the Mississippi area, and within 3 days you have a Cat 5 bearing down, everyone went from, oh, well, it could just be a tropical storm. And then when the next advisory came in, everyone's like, oh, well, that's whenever I'd start preparing. And so I think there really is, that's kind of a dangerous, I don't know, perception of the public of how they perceive and digest that information, because I think people really are, even though we went through Katrina down here, people still kind of focus in on, oh, what the category is, how strong is it, where is it, what's it going to be? And I think those are still things that need to be worked on and still need to be stressed, that the category system is not the only way to assess the risks of a multi-hazard event like a hurricane.
There are 3 pieces of video. Mark Suttis video from Mexico Beach, our friend Brad Adair's near-death experience, and the guy who was in the condo in Mexico Beach. If you just show those 3 videos, they're amazing. And I don't know that I saw too much video. Maybe you have it in the archive there, Eric, on the Mississippi coast. You know, there was some good video. Mr. Eds, I think, some other folks that were in the Holiday Inn in Gulfport. Right. But the wind in Michael was so fierce. And then you see the surge coming in. Mark Suttis' video, he was just on the show a couple of weeks ago, should be must see television for every coastal resident, because people who didn't think, you know, well, a 3, what's a 3? Right. It kept overperforming.
Yeah.
We do a every beginning of hurricane season, we do a Prepare South Mississippi Hurricane Special, and every year our opening is actually the 911 phone calls from Katrina, and it really does. It's so dramatic, but at the same time, for that to prepare, it really does send a message that, you know, not every storm is going to be a Katrina, but you need to be ready for at least what could happen.
At least one category above, and maybe 2. Dr. John, right. you were mentioning some good stuff there in the chat about the cone.
Yeah, I think that is an incredibly misunderstood piece of information. And Kevin was sending around, I guess it was your pick of the week from last week, right, Kev? Oh, he may be working.
We're in show right now.
Okay, sorry. My mistake. But it's a simplistic graphic. So you would think it would be easy to understand, but it's probably the worst understood graphic. And I'm really glad the National Hurricane Center took the center line away from that.
And it has one.
We don't show the center line.
No, and you can take it off, and you need to keep it off, or you have to add it back in. You know, I have to forecast for hotels that are in the hurricane zone, and that thing is useful to me in one way. On the Hurrivac software, I run it on the left side of the cone. Here's what's going to happen. I run it on the right side of the cone. Here's what's going to happen. And I tell all those hotels, there is a 10 to 20% chance, whatever it is, depending on the uncertainty, that you might get the left part, you might get the right path. And the cone by itself doesn't tell you that. And we don't have enough software that helps us show that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like how we did it here for Barry. We kind of ran the model tracks with the National Hurricane Center track to convey, and you can shift things on the grid on WSI, so that's helpful to show if it took the more westward or the more eastward track.
Now go ahead, Dr. John. Go ahead.
Oh, we hammer this subject all the time when I teach a class for FEMA on hurricanes. And I travel around the U.S. teaching this class. I show that graphic, and at one point I want them to remember, historically, 1/3 of the time, the center of circulation will be outside that area of uncertainty. And that information...
It's not 100% of the forecast, uncertainty. It's what's the number, Dr. John?
It's
66%?
Only 66% of the forecasts are going to be inside that cone, which means that the risk or the threat for heavy rain, for wind, is way outside that cone.
Yeah. And let's be honest, it's based on historic track error. So you can have a storm where it could go due west or due east, depending on whether it gets picked up by the passing trough. But your cone isn't going to show it. So in that situation, the Hurricane Center usually hedges one way or the other because they don't want to split it down the middle and go someplace that they know it won't go. So they hedge, well, it'll be straight west, straight east, whatever. And I've seen cases where it just completely flips. So the cone doesn't reflect the uncertainty endemic to that storm. It's only about how well they've forecasted in the past. But there are some storms that have naturally a whole lot more uncertainty to them for a variety of reasons, and some that have much narrower uncertainty where we really peg them extraordinarily well. Those tend to be the ones that the Weather Service loves to talk about the forecast for. And but as great as those are, we're really masking the story. And I love what you guys are doing to adapt. What you're talking about is that you're taking these potential other tracks and trying to look at what the impacts would be, and to try to tell your audience a little bit about the storyline that's under the cone. The cone, it's almost like it takes a book and just rips all the pages out and spreads them around and is like, make up your story. It's really, it's about that clear. And you're trying to put together some actual chapters to the book. And I think that's enormously valuable. The Hurricane Center knows this. They know that it's a challenge of their cone. I'm pleased to know that they're evaluating options for changing it up. So that's really wonderful. There's some research that they're undertaking to look at that. Because what we're talking about, man, that is...
We're still also dealing with the potential tropical cyclone tag as well, because I want to say in 2017, Tropical Storm Cindy was probably the first time that was really used in mass public. And it was a system that was impacting us, and we had to get on air and spend so much time just explaining what a potential tropical cyclone was, because, well, everyone knows that if you live in a hurricane zone, you know what a typhoon is, and you know that a cyclone is the hurricane in the Indian Ocean. And so you have all this misconception of, well, I thought hurricanes in the Indian Ocean were cyclones. Why are you calling it this now? And then you have to like lift the door or open the door into the world of meteorology to people and say, meteorologists, just like doctors, they have their own talk. Meteorologists have their own talk. And we refer to any area of low pressure in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. It's low pressure. It's a cyclone. So you explain that, and then you see the light bulb click on. But it takes educating, and I feel like educating is probably maybe a bigger overlooked part of preparation than just telling people, get your supplies, get things ready, get things done. Because the more people know, it kind of helps ease that anxiety, I feel.
So Eric, is it beginning to sink in with your audiences now, this PTC that we talk about?
I think so. I certainly, from the time we had it with Cindy, We had a PTC for Nate that year. Nate was one of those storms that really did what it was supposed to, and it formed in the Caribbean, and just 2 or 3 days later, it made landfall in Biloxi. Thankfully, it's a Cat 1, but it was a well-tracked from the beginning. We were like, yeah, that's coming here. But as far as like now, once we got the PTC for Barry this week, I had much fewer questions. What's a potential cycle? I had 1 or 2, but compared to 2017 and last year with Gordon, not so much.
So panel, here's the question we didn't get to Margaret. She knew when to get out. What do you do when Al Roker's standing in the quarter saying, if I were you, I'd get out? Because they got, these media outlets got a lot of pushback, and that was probably the poster child for it right there.
But let me ask you, because I didn't follow that closely, but I glanced at it somewhere. Was he saying that, or was it more of a preparatory statement? I mean,
I think he said, if I lived here, I would be getting out, because getting out, if I lived in the hurricane cone of uncertainty, I would be getting out, and that was just his advice.
Because the thing I read, I felt like it could have gone both ways, but then I know he always, he goes a little crazy with that X number of million people affected on the SPC outlooks sometimes, especially when we get a higher risk day. That tends to be a little hypey, but I wasn't sure which way he went this time.
Well, you had to go as far as the city of New Orleans had to tweet back at somebody, the Washington Post, I guess, and say, this is misleading what you're saying. So Kim, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's exactly the thing that I think is so challenging, is that this is something where as forecasters, we have to be sort of mindful of the public officials that we're supposed to be working with, and he as a can't help but see this through the eyes of a geographer. He's a national media personality who isn't connected to the local place, and he doesn't have that relationship. And I think that's what we saw play out was sort of the risk aversiveness of someone who doesn't live there, batted up against the local officials who had really deep knowledge about the sophisticated, intricacies of all the forecasts. They were talking with the forecast office. They knew that this was a sort of upper bound forecast, and they knew what their capacities were. And so their bottom line was that they wanted to keep as much of the city functioning as they could. They didn't want people to incur the cost of evacuating. We've seen that in especially last minute kinds of evacuations in the past, people can perish in the process of evacuating. And they know their populations, and they know the sensitivity of those trade-offs and risks. And this isn't to slight Al. I think it's just about a difference in perspective, and something that as media nationalizes, I'm concerned about. I think that there's that's really the story. This is about the national versus the local perspective.
But Kim, I got a question for you. I mean, I wonder about. I mean, the city of New Orleans, you look at history, doesn't necessarily enjoy a good track record with all this stuff.
Oh, that's a fair point.
And then the trust of government.
That is a
trust of government
point.
So but what we're pointing out here doesn't do anything, Kim, but create more confusion.
Right.
And that's part of if it be the situation as it may, in whatever you understand or believe about what's going on in the politicking, internal machinations in New Orleans, there is something that could be harmful to having this very incredibly inconsistent message going out to the public and causing the confusion. What really should I do? And the problem here was, even if there was a national or someone outside the situation who disagreed with New Orleans and their decision, there was not the planning in place to get a whole lot of people evacuated. So that I hate to say it, you can't really push the envelope on that, especially not in that time scale. It's just hard. It's a tough situation. Everyone has feelings about what people ought to do. And I just tend I want to say to our field, I think we really need to try to be very respectful of local officials and their decision making. This was a conversation that was not quite so straightforward in other situations like Harvey, where officials were disagreeing about evacuation. We had a governor who was at odds with a mayor, and that was a challenging time for all meteorologists. what do you do then? It's a tough situation that, and I think in every case we need to actually evaluate. There's no necessarily straightforward answer because there is uncertainty endemic to the forecast. It is a tough game, but as much as we can, I think we should try to err with public officials.
Well, you certainly want to get to the point where I'm sorry, Bill, but
no.
You want to get to the point where that inconsistency, Kim, doesn't result in you killing people.
Right.
That's the whole key is, when you get to that point and we started killing people in this process.
But, I remember that Saturday night before Katrina, because Brian and I were sitting in Mobile or somewhere gassing up, and we were listening to the mayor, and he was obviously holding back on an evacuation, which we felt like by that time needed to have already been ordered. And obviously the forecast, the meteorology, the Hurricane Center, everybody was over here and they were over here. This week it was sort of reversed.
Yeah.
It was like the Hurricane Center was like over here and the Weather Service and everybody, but some of the national media was over here, and it becomes really, a very difficult situation. Kim, when you explain this stuff, I understand 95% of what you say, and it just really always gets right to the point. It's really amazing, some of the stuff you say. So,
can we talk about the meteorology here for just a second? And
yeah,
was anybody else scratching their head looking at the satellite imagery with a totally exposed center of circulation, like all the convection to the south, and didn't anybody
with no clothes on here?
Yeah.
And the strongest winds, sustained winds, were in the convection to the southeast. I was doing this, I was thinking, wait, something has to really change for this to be a big deal. Wow.
And I saw some meteorologists put a 10-part tweet out. They needed to evacuate on Thursday when all this was becoming evident, and that was the scary part to me.
Well, John, the thing to me over the weekend was that beautiful mid-level water vapor imagery that we were looking at that showed here's a storm that's continuing to intensify, that's exposed to dry air on the north side of it. In the spite of that, I guess the water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico were very warm, but it was amazing to see that because you're sitting there going, I'm pretty sure that textbook said this is not supposed to happen.
Yeah. Right. That's very good.
Let me ask let me ask everybody here: was this thing a hurricane at the time of landfall? Yes or no? Be honest. It's nobody's feelings will get hurt. Just be honest.
So I have to.
A hurricane for an hour.
Well, was hearing what you guys are saying. I unfortunately wasn't able to watch it as it made landfall. What was landfall? If what I'm understanding is right, what even was there a center of circulation to make landfall?
In their discussion, they said that the circulation was so broad and disorganized that they'll have to go in post-analysis to determine the actual point of landfall and when it made landfall.
You can see the hurricane hunters. You can see the hurricane hunters chasing the swirls.
And you got to remember too, this area is in those southern parishes of Louisiana. It made landfall with 7 alligators and 27 cottonmouths. It was in an area that really does not have much of a population. It's a very low population. But I also thought that was interesting too, Eric. When you kind of watch that and you're sitting there going, and I think even in chat, in the New Orleans chat, I was watching that, and some people were saying, "Well, has it made landfall?" And they said, "Oh, we're waiting for the Hurricane Center to officially tell us that."
Right?
Are we using this center or this center or this center?
But they can't fly over land.
That's right.
They cannot fly over land. So
I've been hearing intracoastal city and hurricane center advisories for 45 years of my life, and I finally figured out where intracoastal city was on this hurricane.
Well, we got to get Kim Graham on this show because I'm not going to say who this is, but somebody in the Weather Enterprise said this will be a hurricane at the time of landfall. It will be. It doesn't really matter about wind speed or anything else. The observations, it will be a hurricane at the time of landfall. And I think, what?
You mean said that beforehand?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Also,
and sure enough, it was magically a hurricane for 1 hour.
Are there any insurance reasons why that
hurricane, the course of least regret?
I don't know.
Is
I don't
there
know.
an insurance reason for making it a hurricane? I don't know the answer to that.
There certainly
We-
can
we
be.
need-
There are riders on policies, which
Yeah.
have a lot to do with whether it's a hurricane or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we
And
got to get
I
Ken
think
on there. I'll have
that
to get-
might have something to do with it, but we got to get King Graham on the show.
We also had the problem because their forecast for actual hurricane reaching hurricane status kept on falling in between the point
Right.
on the forecast
Yeah.
track. So with each advisory that would come in, and we actually started doing every time we had an advisory come up, we would actually do a cut in and do that's just part of our hurricane coverage. At 7 o'clock, we're saying, oh, a landfall along central Louisiana as a tropical storm. But then the next advisory, that forecast point was missing, and the hurricane icon was gone. And so then then we kept on having questions of, and people do get caught up in, was it going to be a hurricane or is it going to be a tropical storm?
Yeah,
People
exactly.
do get
5 miles an hour.
No matter what, they do get caught up in that, and that is just end all be all for them. And you keep on playing with that, and you're playing with people's minds there.
Yeah.
I think I do recall at least seeing some of the media coverage that were at landfall. There were some people in the New Orleans market that finally said, "Who cares?"
Yeah,
it's a very strong storm at this point, and you've got to concentrate on that.
The thing that gets me about this whole conversation is, we've talked about surge, we've talked about wind. The real deal with this, and with so many of the recent systems that have caused so much devastation, is it's about the rain, and it's about where the rain will fall, and that generally doesn't respect category at all.
Yep.
I mean, it is almost completely decoupled from category.
That was our main concern too. That's what we were most worried about, where those rain bands hit up. Ironically, I'm actually from central Louisiana. I grew up in Avoyelles Parish, which is kind of near Alexandria. On Saturday, all of my family and friends are on Facebook were like, this is no hurricane, this is nothing, what was all the hype? Well, last night that rain band sat up right on top of it, dumped a foot of rain on my house, or where I grew up. And everyone's on Facebook saying, oh, Barry heard us talking about him, like, oh, Barry's getting his revenge. And that's it.
Wow.
That's what you have to prepare your viewing area for, is the case like that, where even after landfall, and that was kind of the message too, because it was such a lopsided storm. We had to really convey that we may not get the most rain in Mississippi until the center gets north of us.
Yeah,
because it's like that convection just kept on persisting over the Gulf, and it had really great outflow over that convection too. So I don't know if that's what led to it just kind of breathing and kind of taking over. It was a really weird storm, lopsided, sloppy.
Well, you had, Eric, over there east of you, right on the state line between there and Mobile County, and back over there, one of those rain bands set up in that area. What were some of the rainfall totals around Mobile and back toward the Florida Panhandle over there?
I focused on our viewing area. I didn't really look out over into Mobile and Pensacola, but I do know that they had I think they even had a sewage problem. Maybe I thought I read. Is that anybody heard about that?
No.
Something about flooding in Mobile County caused the sewage to back up and actually go into the Gulf. Maybe I'm spreading false news. I don't know, but I thought I read that. But for our viewing area, Jackson County sits right on the border with Mobile County, and there were parts of Jackson County that saw anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of rain, and also Pearl River. It's like the two edges of our viewing area got those rain bands, but the center part we didn't really get much, which I'm grateful for.
Needless to say, we won't have the tourism organizations advertising on WeatherBrains. We got blue algae over here and red algae over here, and
sewage over there
flowing out into the Gulf. It's like,
Well, I have a really quick question for you. You raised sort of where you're from in Louisiana. You're familiar with some of the populations. Do you know if anyone had the 2016 flooding in mind when this event was coming toward shore? Because that was, again, it was a system that wasn't named. It was just like sort of a subtropical thing, but it caused an incredible amount of rainfall. And it took people by surprise. Oh, it wasn't even a hurricane, and it kind of, it escaped the national consciousness which is awful for that area because it did not help the area to recover in that it didn't get attention because it wasn't a stinking hurricane. But was that on people's minds?
I have a few cousins who lost everything in that flood. I mean, they're not where they were back in 2016. But yeah, that's exactly we mentioned that amongst us because again that particular event impacted us just to the west. But within our discussions here at WLX, we're like, well, this unorganized, sloppy system like this, it could be a surprise. It could be one of those things because the GFS a lot of times wanted to hug the coast, kind of like that 2016 disturbance did. Hug the coast and then overnight just burst into a big rain blob. And so that was
all the moisture.
And that was another reason why we just really try to drive home the fact that we could get a lot of rain, but there's a lot of uncertainty with it. And thankfully we didn't get that. But, you know, it's interesting. The Gulf Coast really has had a lot of those big 20 to 30 widespread rainfall events in the last few years. I mean, there was a 2016 event. And that same year, Louisiana had there was the Mayan Express, if everyone remembers that, the fetch of moisture from all the way the Caribbean or from the Pacific.
Oh yeah.
That flood, if you remember that was 2016 as well. So in the beginning of 2016, Louisiana had a big flooding event along the Sabine River, which is on the west side. Then later on in 2016 was the big rain event there. And then, of course, you had Harvey in 2017, which was another widespread 20 to 30 inch. And since I've been here in 2016, in late 2016, when I've gotten here, we've had several events from just thunderstorms or just little disturbances that just kind of set up on the Mississippi coast and dump a foot of rain. And this year, just north of us in Hattiesburg, in January, they had a 12 to 15 inch rain event, which kind of was the beginning of the wetness that led to the Mississippi River being so full and dropping her salinity level. So yeah, flooding is always a big deal here. It's going to rain, and a lot of times the Weather Service in New Orleans, Ken Graham, when he was the director there here, or the main guy there, he always said like this area does get a overexceedance of events a lot of times. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated just to, that's what I had in mind when this was coming toward the shore, was this could just become something where this disturbance sets up near the shore, and it's not a hurricane, but it's more devastating than a hurricane by far. And I hate to see those events because they don't capture the national attention as a hurricane does. And I hate to think, like, what is it about stupid wind that makes people care more? What is it about that? Because flooding by far kills more people. It by far causes more damage, ruins more livelihoods. What you're talking about earlier, all the devastation, caused by the freshwater intrusion, these things, they aren't as sensational in some way, but they're so much more important. So I'm sure that the people that you serve appreciate the attention that you bring to it because they feel it. And these events are going to continue. And, this is the stuff we need to prepare for. And this is the stuff we need to communicate better. We really need to be able to hammer this home in a more salient way.
Agreed.
And bringing out that history is so important. Dr. John, you were mentioning memories are still long in your region back to 1969 for Hurricane Camille.
Yeah. All you have to do is drive down US 29 through central Virginia, and even if you're not aware of what happened, just look at the hillside. It's still there. So there are portions of the Blue Ridge which still have no vegetation on it. So there was entire families lost. I think what we forget is there are 141 fatalities from flooding after Camille made landfall.
Yep.
Wow. In Pennsylvania, so many.
Well, that was
a part of it too.
Most of it was in Virginia and to the south.
Okay.
Yeah, but for us in Pennsylvania, there were others. Ivan. Ivan was a $350 million disaster for the state of Pennsylvania.
And then Agnes in 1972, Dr. John.
that's the storm of record from us, right? Was Agnes. But even Lee, Tropical Storm Lee, came on the heels of, well, it pushed us into the record books. It's the wettest year of all time here, 2011.
Well, it seems like one interesting thing, for the national media is that the New York Times has gotten some accolades in Louisiana because they actually, brought in some reporters from the Times-Picayune and put them on staff and said, we need that local ground truth. Comment on that, Kim, for a second.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic, and they were getting lauded because they were listening to local voices, and they brought in people who were very sensitive to and aware of the local conversation, and all you have to do is hear the feedback from the local population to know just how important that was. And I think that the New York Times earned it was much to their credit. This is what I encourage us all to think about. And it's hard. It's hard when you're a meteorologist. I think we all feel this burden on ourselves to try to help people as much as we can. And one of the ways that we try to do that is if there's anything that could be risky on the horizon, especially if there's a potentially catastrophic risk, even if the odds are low, we feel this burden on our soul to talk about it, because we would loathe to see it on the horizon and not have said anything. And it makes us a very risk-averse population. And I think that when you have a national purview, that kind of thing can maybe hit you even harder, to be in Al Roker's shoes. But it's about having those relationships at the local level, and the local level is where everything is experienced. The different municipalities have different risk tolerances, and we have to respect that.
True. That's so true.
Yeah.
All right, Eric, we brought you on here to talk about algae, and then a little hurricane broke out. So did we leave any important topics uncovered in the algal bloom department?
Well, let's see. I guess maybe we can just kind of recap. Again, the reason we're seeing the algal bloom in the Mississippi Sound is because of the unprecedented flooding from the Mississippi River. It's been flooded forever. Another thing that, speaking of national news, I don't think the national news has really covered the flooding in northern Mississippi and the Delta region. There are areas there that have been underwater for months because of the river. The river is so high. So I don't know if everyone can see me. Can y'all still hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Screen just went blank.
You have to feed it more quarters, Eric.
But no, that water, it keeps on going through the Bonnie Carrier spillway, and that fresh water is like sort of a contact lens on your eye. It just kind of sits on the top of the water, and that fresh water, we saw our salinity levels tank in the spring, and then once we started getting all the nutrients from the fertilizer that is in the floodwaters getting into the sound, and then that algae, the blue-green algae, that species that thrives in fresh water, while our salinity levels are so low, it can do well in the sound. And starting in late June is actually when our first beaches started closing, because Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality started testing the water in Hancock County, and that's our county closest to Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Bourne. That happened in late June, and then by the beginning of July, all our beaches were closed. And so, speaking of national media, again, it took several weeks for national media to ever pick that up, but we were covering that since the beginning in early June, that we're starting to get this algal bloom that shouldn't really be in the Sound, impacting the area. And it's still there. So everyone was worried. Everyone was hopeful that Barry would actually churn up the waters enough to get rid of the algal bloom. But yesterday, MDEQ was out in Jackson County, which is our county furthest away from Lake Pontchartrain, the freshwater intrusion. Jackson County and Biloxi, they tested the water. There's still the algal bloom in there. I did look at salinity levels yesterday for the week of last week, and the beginning before Barry, they were very low, but they did go up during Barry being there. And I think a lot of that was due because we had more of an easterly wind, and that did kind of help push some of the fresh water back a little bit. But the thing is, when you get a south wind, it actually piles the freshwater in the Sound, because if you look at the geography of the coast, the Mississippi Sound's in between the three coastal counties of the mainland, and then you have the barrier islands to the south, and so it gets trapped in there. So when you get a south wind, it just traps it in there. But when you get a north wind, the better scenario for Barry for us would have been a Mobile landfall, and we would have had a north wind, and that would have really helped push that freshwater out and restore the salinity levels, and that would help get rid of the algae, because the algae can't handle the salt. So beaches are closed. 4th of July took a big hit, another hit for our coastal economy. There are vendors that, 4th of July is everything for them. The jet ski rentals and their beach umbrellas, like that's their livelihood. And a lot of beaches were just closed for the 4th of July weekend. And we interviewed one of the vendors, and they told us that they had to sell some of their jet skis off because of the algal bloom and how long it's persisted and how long the beaches have been closed. So it's been a really long process to get here, because it's something we started watching early in the spring of our salinity levels dropping, and that impacting the fishing industry here, the shrimping industry. And I feel like that too really hasn't gotten a lot of national media coverage. In fact, in general, people in South Mississippi really feel like the national media just works between from New Orleans to Mobile. And in fact, one of my friends on Facebook, she wrote on Facebook the other day, she's like, why can't the national media just say Mississippi? Why can't they say the storm is going to make land? They can say the storm is going to make landfall somewhere between Mobile and New Orleans. Why can't they say Mississippi? And then I don't know how many of you are familiar with the landmass between New Orleans and Mobile. Have you ever heard of that? There is I want to say during Isaac, one of the reporters from the Weather Network, I think from Canada, didn't know what to call Mississippi.
Oh my gosh.
They referred to Mississippi as the landmass between New Orleans and Mobile.
Wow.
But somehow the Weather Channel got blamed for that. And Jim Cantore got blamed for that. And so now the joke is, anytime, even us, we're the local station, we are the news for South Mississippi. Even if we don't specifically mention South Mississippi or Gulfport, people are going to comment and say, well, we must be the landmass again. So it's just one of those things that stick, and it really does. The national way things are covered do have an impact on the local communities that are impacted by the entity. And another thing I just thought of is in 2016, how the August floods in Louisiana didn't get the national coverage as other events may have. That same year was the big blizzard that went up the East Coast, and every single national media outlet was on the East Coast covering in that. But then you had this really massive life-changing event happening in the South, and it was barely even mentioned. So it's one of those things.
Well, we'll keep beating the drum. Keep screaming the message down there, Eric. We're so glad Kevin invited you tonight. Kevin, can you talk for 1 second? Or you? No.
Second, we're about to hit the air. Yeah.
No pick or anything you can share. We'll have to have it on the website.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to nominate that Eric just replace me. He can be the accelerant, and he obviously did a great job tonight. So, bye. Nice knowing y'all.
Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Eric, we'll come back to you for a pick of the week in a second. We don't have many folks between you and that happening right now. Kim, do you got a pick of the week for us?
Yep, my pick is a map. I know that it was going around Weather Nerd circles a year or two ago, but I thought it really appropriate to bring back. It's a map of really elegant, beautiful map of all of the nation's the nation river systems, the watersheds. And what it shows is one of the reasons why the forecast for Barry was so extraordinarily sensitive. If the water had fallen just a little bit west or a little bit east, then it would have fallen into a very different river catchment system, and the impacts would have been completely different. So when you were talking about the opening of various spillways, for example, each of those spillways is attached to one of these river systems, and so want to just throw that back out there for everybody to take a look at and think again about just how difficult the flooding forecasts are for that part of the world.
Well, that's a great pick of the week. And thank you for your expert commentary every week, Kim. It really adds to the show. Thank you so much for that. So,
I love being here.
Yeah. Troy, what you got for us?
Well, I want to give a plug out. We do this pretty often. These people have great website, but I want to thank Pete and the folks in Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A great satellite website, and it goes east or go 16, go 17 website, and a lot of good choices. And not too long ago, someone questioned me, said, well, they don't have a South Central United States sector, don't have one centered sort of on Texas. And as you well know, Texas is the center of the earth. And so I talked to Pete about that, and Pete's in the process of setting that up. But folks, if you want a really cool place, they've got that mid-level, beautiful water vapor satellite image we have talked about a little bit. A lot of good stuff. And there's a couple of web addresses, which I'll pass along, and we'll get up on the website. But really nice. And thank you, Pete. Thank all the people at the University of Wisconsin up at Madison.
And thank you, Troy. We missed you while you were gone, and good to have you back. Glad you made it back safe and sound.
Thank you.
And my picks of the week with a great guest coming up. Next week, we're going to have Victoria Allen from the National Weather Service in Flagstaff. She's going to be joined by Natalie Panasiak. They worked together to translate for their local population, Kim, the Navajo population.
Yes, I've heard about this. Oh, so cool.
And so I did a test hangout with them today, and it's really going to be fascinating. So we will learn a lot tonight. I think tonight my learning quotient on this show was about as high as it's ever been between Eric and Margaret and everyone's input, Kim's normal, wonderful input. It was just a great show. So, Eric, we've given you a little time. Can you throw out a pick of the week for us?
Well, I wasn't really sure what a pick of the week was, and I was debating if it would be my cat who's sleeping down there at
That
works.
But I was actually because earlier I got a text from my mom that I grew up in Bordelonville, Louisiana, which is in Avoyelles Parish, and my mom sent me a picture of the bayou that's in front of her house. It's really high, the highest I've ever seen it after we got that rain ban from Barry last night, which dumped a foot of rain right on top of the bayou. That bayou flooded in 1927, and in 1927 was the year of the Great Flood that changed the course of the Mississippi River, so to speak, as far as how we're going to do the river control or flooding control system. Because the Army Corps of Engineers, after that flood, that's whenever they stepped in and really started to build the levee systems that we have now in place to really lock the Mississippi River in place and where it is. And while I was Googling some things, I did come across a website called 64parishes.org. And it's just sort of it has some good historical pictures of the flooding there. And there's actually pictures of my hometown, Bordelonville, that flooded when that levee broke. The levee broke, and my great-grandparents were there when that happened. And there are some really great pictures on 64parishes.org. I really just glanced at it, but since that's my pick of the week really at a last minute. But if you want to go back and look at that, it has a really good picture of what it was like to go through the levee breaking in Avoyelles Parish back then in 1927.
I know you spent time up there at Morganza in that spillway, and I remember standing on it during just a fairly normal flood, and it's frightening.
It is. I grew up going over that bridge. I mean, I always knew it as, it's the bridge where we're going to do this whenever we're going into the. That's how I always knew it as, and then. It was never really opened as me growing up until 2011 is the last time. Really, it's only been opened twice. Back in, I want to say, in the 50s, and then, 1973.
Yeah, the 73 flood.
And then in 2011 is when it was open, and they never opened it for this flood. So There it is.
Well, outstanding. Well, thank you for joining us tonight, Eric. You brought a lot to the show, and I'm just
Well,
thankful
thank
I
you.
didn't have to introduce you and say your last name. I would have
Oh, Johnson.
totally would have butchered that. So
It's the Cajun French version of Johnson.
That's awesome.
Oh, geez.
My wife will appreciate that. Yeah. So there's another show title probably buried in there somewhere. So, but anyway, WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. This has been one of my favorite shows. We've been doing this for a long time now. Next week will be show 705. Just absolutely amazing. But you can tell your friends about us. You can pick us up most anywhere you can find a podcast. And we'll be changing platform shortly, but it won't change any of our ways to get the podcast to you. We normally do it on Monday nights. And for the next several weeks, that looks like that's where we'll be. And we'll be heading into the heart of hurricane season. But until next week, when we talk to our friends from the National Weather Service in Flagstaff, I'm Bill Murray for the whole WeatherBrains gang, reminding you to keep an eye to the sky because you'll always have something fun to look at. Outstanding, Eric. Come back anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, it was great stuff, man. We appreciate you. Yeah,
thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
Y'all have a good night, Kim,
You
Troy.
too.
Night.
All right.
sister station to see the SEC football special. All right, so we got to end our WeatherBrains simulcast. If you've never seen this before, this is kind of weird. It gets really strange because we're about to do 2 shows at once. Okay. Hello, hello, hello. This is this odd time where we sometimes simulcast WeatherBrains and Song of the Night. If you watch WeatherBrains tonight, thank you. I thought it was a great show. Always miss catching the end. But we had Margaret Orr of WDSU New Orleans on with us. And she was just a great guest. We talked about Barry and a lot of really good stuff. That was a fascinating show tonight. So if you're a weather weenie, if you don't know, WeatherBrains is our 13-year-old podcast, and it drops about, 1, 2 a.m. after midnight tonight. The audio version, the video version, as soon as I click that button, will be on YouTube. In fact, it's on now. We're still live. But we're ending this because we're in the middle of a newscast. I got to go back. So if you want to catch us on Song of the Night, if you're watching on YouTube, on the WeatherBrains channel, on Instagram, I'm SpanWX. I had to stick a WX on there because some jabroni got spanned before I could get in there. How did that happen? So anyway, SpanWX on Instagram. But anyway, thank you guys for watching WeatherBrains. We will see you guys next Monday night. Y'all have a great week and God bless. Bye.